Thank you for joining me. My name is Corinne Dreisky, and for today's presentation, I'm going to be going over the differences between special education and Section 504. My ideal career is a middle school principal, and with that in mind, my ideal audience is going to be teachers and staff, since they have a daily contact with these students, administration, because they need to ensure compliance, and counseling, because they see students on a more personal level. First, looking at special education. Who's served? It's those students that qualify under one of the 13 disabilities listed under IDEA 2004, and that disability must have an adverse or negative impact on their ability to learn and their education. How do they qualify? They must be between the ages of 3 and 21. Anything outside of this date range, then they'll be able to qualify for other programs. Their identified disability must have a negative impact on their learning, and they must require special programs and special instructions in order for them to meet special and certain milestones. The ways that these students can be found is Child Find. That's when teachers and staff are able to actually identify students that need special education, and they refer them to different programs. And in order to be qualified under one of those 13 disabilities, it must be on a research-based evaluation system. It's got to be research-based or they can't qualify. And something with special education, you have to have parental consent. Without that, they're unable to receive services. So what is provided? A free and appropriate public education, meaning parents and families aren't having to financially provide for any of the education. Students are also going to be in the least restrictive environment as possible, meaning they are as close to general education as they possibly can be. Something else that you'll find under special education are IEPs and BIPs. These are individualized education plans and behavioral intervention plans. These help students meet certain goals and ensure that the appropriate behavior is displayed in the classroom. You'll also find accommodations and modifications, which we'll get into in a little bit. So who provides these services? Typically, you'll see special education teachers with those closed-off classrooms where it's just special education students. A lot of times you'll see paraprofessionals working with general education teachers for those students that are in those inclusion classes, where they're trying to be integrated back into general education as much as possible. Administrators work with special education to ensure compliance, and counselors see students on a personal basis in case they need any additional help that can't be provided by teachers or paraprofessionals. What approaches are used? Accommodations and modifications. You're going to typically see more modifications because that's actually changing the content that they're learning as opposed to an accommodation that just changes the environment. Something else that you will see are medical services that are provided that don't need to be provided by a medical professional, meaning help with going to the restroom and things of that nature. There's also many different therapies like speech therapy that could be provided under special education, and something special for this is transportation. It helps students that are otherwise disabled and can't be in a typical bus. They have special buses that are to transport those students only. Now, how will this program be monitored? Through weekly meetings with the special education department and the superintendent. Meeting with the superintendent allows me to learn if there's any new requirements, and meeting with the special education department helps me relay that information to make sure we're in compliance. There's also the requirement of daily documentation of anything that happens in the classroom, and I'd like to do monthly teacher check-ins with those that are working with our inclusion students. Common mistakes that you'll find that teachers make in special education is thinking that a one-size-fits-all. If this happens, then this is what we do, and that's not necessarily true. We need to look at students as individuals before we come up with our individual education plans or our behavioral intervention plans. Another common mistake is inappropriate or insufficient documentation. I'd like to provide professional development for teachers to ensure that we systemize our documentation and that we are all on the same page and we're in compliance. Looking at Section 504, it's similar, but it's also different in many different ways. So who's served? It's those individuals with physical or mental impairments that affect daily life, but not necessarily their ability to learn. So a student that is cognitively all there, that's in a wheelchair, would fall under Section 504. The special thing with Section 504 is that these accommodations actually last them after they graduate and move into the workforce or into a university. So how do students qualify? Well, they have to have a legally defined impairment. It has to be in place, and anybody can refer these students to the program. Parental consent is also not required to begin looking into 504 accommodations. Now, because a student qualifies for 504 does not necessarily mean that they'll qualify for special education under IDEA, but all special education students qualify for Section 504. What is provided under Section 504? Again, that free, appropriate public education. If they need it, they get it. And they also get the same accommodations and modifications. Who provides these services? It's typically your general education teachers. They receive the paperwork at the beginning of the year. They know who these students are. They know their accommodations, and they're good to go. Administration helps ensure compliance, and counselors help see those students on a more personal note. The main approach is used is accommodations, but you will see some modifications. The most accommodation you'll see is probably something about reading the assessment or the assignment out loud, either reading everything or reading at the student request. So it's accommodating the learning environment, not necessarily the content. How will this program be monitored? With weekly superintendent meetings and weekly teacher check-ins, again, to make sure that we're doing everything properly and we're in compliance, and that daily documentation that's required to make sure that we can track everything that we're doing in our class and the accommodations that we're providing. Common mistakes is a small sample set. When we have yearly meetings, we only bring 1 or 2 assignments to use as reference, and we need to bring more. So it will be required to have at least several different types of work or student work from different content areas. And there's a lack of training for providing accommodations, so I'd like to provide some professional development for my teachers. Thank you so much for watching my presentation. I look forward to seeing you next time.